Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the April 17th meeting of the Temple City Council. If you'll please rise, Ms. Terry Snyder, the Director of Child Development with Emmanuel Baptist Church, will lead us in our invocation, and Lisa Seebeck with Solid Waste City of Temple will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Snyder.
If you pray with me, please. Heavenly Father, I just thank you so much for this wonderful day and for this wonderful city that we live in. And Father, I just thank you for these officials here today and for our mayor. And Father, today I want to especially thank you for children and what children mean to each one of us. Father, we look to them as the future of our community. And Father, we just pray that we would be good leaders for these children, Father. And we just pray that you invite you to this meeting tonight and pray that you would be in the midst of this group during all business matters tonight, Father. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray these things. Amen.
Please join me in honoring our nation's flag. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you to Terry and Lisa both for leading us. I appreciate that very much. And Mr. Terry Snyder, if you'll please come forward. And we have a proclamation to present. And it almost seems like we've done this before. Welcome to the Temple City Council. It's great to have you here. And let me offer this proclamation, then we'll let you say a few words about what this event means. Okay, thank you. From the office of the Mayor of the City of Temple, whereas the City of Temple is honored to join with the Temple Belton area of child care centers and schools in recognition of the Week of the Young Child, which is a special time set aside to encourage early learning opportunities, including literacy programs that can provide a foundation for learning for children. Whereas teachers and others who make a difference in the lives of young children in our community deserve our heartfelt appreciation and recognition. Whereas public policies that support early learning for all young children are crucial to young children's futures. And whereas the public cooperation from the home, school, and community is needed to fulfill our responsibilities to young children. Now therefore I, William A. Jones III, Mayor of the City of Temple, Texas, do hereby proclaim April 13th through 19th of 2008 as Week of the Young Child in the City of Temple, Texas. And I encourage all citizens and encourage all efforts made for the early learning and well-being of young children in our community. In testimony whereof, I witness my hand and the seal of the City of Temple, Texas, this 17th day of April 2008. And this was much easier to read without all that wind earlier today.
Thank you so much.
Terry, thanks for coming. Thanks for being a part of our council. If you'll tell us a little bit about the Week of the Young Child and your activities.
The Week of the Young Child is actually founded by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. I invited some other centers today, but I don't see them here. But many of the area child care centers and schools have been celebrating all week by doing just extra special fun things at their schools. We've had many different things at our Child Development Center this week. And this Saturday, we're all coming together for a family fun day in the park at Miller Park here in Temple. I invite each one of you, if you have children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, or anything like that, to bring them out. And we just want to recognize these children and look to them as the future of our community, and be sure that we're helping them to learn and grow as they need to. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next proclamation we have is for Community Cleanup Day, and we have two of our staff members here with us to receive this. Nicole Taralva, who is the Assistant Director of Public Works, and Lisa Seebeck, Solid Waste Superintendent. Thank you for being with us, and I'll read this and then let you tell us about the activities, if that'd be all right. Whereas the City of Temple is dedicated to enhancing the livability of the community by promoting improvement of the quality of life through assistance in improvements and enhancement to publicly owned areas. Whereas a community cleanup day will be held on April the 26th of 2008 when caring citizens come together through commitment and pride to do their part to sustain and improve the quality of life in Temple, Texas. Whereas it is anticipated that this extensive cleanup campaign will increase community awareness of the benefits of a healthful, safe environment. And whereas it is important that all citizens in Temple commit to helping make and keep Temple beautiful and clean. Now therefore I, William A. Jones III, Mayor of the City of Temple, Texas, do hereby proclaim Saturday, April 26th of 2008 as Community Cleanup Day in the City of Temple, Texas. And I urge all citizens, civic and service organizations to participate in fulfilling the goals of this invaluable project, designed to enrich both the appearance and the health standards of the City of Temple. I further urge all citizens to express appreciation to all those who have a part in making this project a great success. In testimony whereof I witness my hand and the seal of the City of Temple, Texas, this 17th day of April of 2008. Thank you for your leadership in helping put this together. Thank you. Appreciate it. And Nicole, thank you very much.
Just want to say a few words about Community Cleanup Day. It is scheduled for next Saturday, April 26th. And what we will be doing as a city is putting out roll-off containers in several locations throughout the city. We have some flyers available at either door that shows some proposed locations. We will be solidifying those in the next few days and getting that information out to the media. So we would encourage you to go through your homes if you have any bulky items. The roll-off containers will be out there on Saturday. We will come by the following week and collect those roll-off containers. But this is targeted toward bulky items and general community cleanup. So look forward to a good, successful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, lady. Alan, do we have a microphone on this podium?
Yeah.
Is it there? Okay.
Yeah.
Next is a recognition of HEB for their support and sponsorship of various city activities. Mr. Skor? No, I do not, as a matter of fact.
Okay, I'll just stay here. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. A couple meetings ago, we had the opportunity to recognize and thank several members of the community who, without their help, we would not be able to have done several of our major special events. And tonight we have the honor to recognize one of our very important sponsors who, in the 10 years I've been with the city, has, I think, been there just about that long helping out. And they've really come to bat for us and helped us out in a very big way with our July 4th event. They are the major sponsor for our fireworks show. Without them, we could not have that show. And for our Hot Summer Sounds music series that goes on throughout the summertime at Miller Park. And tonight we'd like to have Brenda Johnson come up, and I'd like Anna Foster too. She'd come up. Sorry, Anna, she brought you up. I apologize. Anna is our special event coordinator, and you can get the plaque. And we'd just like to thank Brenda for HEB, and thanks for coming tonight, for all the help you do. HEB does throughout the year for the department and the city.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your loyalty at my store and the community. Appreciate it.
Next item on our agenda is opportunity for public comment. Citizens desiring to address the council on any matter may sign up to do so prior to the meeting. Public comments will be received during this portion of the meeting. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. No discussion or final action will be taken by the City Council. First individual we have signed up to speak is Mr. Milton Hensley. Mr. Hensley?
Thank you, Mayor Jones and members of the council. My name is Milton Hensley. I live at 301 Mitchell Drive. I realize that on the upcoming bond election for the upgrading of our fire system here, it's needed quite a bit. I think they do a terrific job, second to none. The central fire station is in dire need of upgrading. My question is, where will the central fire station be built? And that's my question. I think, it needs, I know that y'all have pondered it many, many times, but we don't know. The citizens don't know. And for us to make a sound decision, we would like to know where it's going to be located. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Next is Heath Robinson. Mr. Robinson.
I'm Heath Robinson. I live at 4005 Wagon Trail, and I was coming to address the council regarding the addendum to the ordinance regarding the masonry restrictions. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. One, I probably wouldn't have been against this ordinance a couple of years ago. A couple of reasons that have persuaded me to oppose it that I'd like to share with you. One of them is that I have recently become a business owner in the community. With my dad, I purchased Quinn Construction. They erect metal buildings and do steel erection. Now, that's not why I oppose it, because it might affect my business. In fact, I would argue that most of the clients that I might have would not be affected because they might move outside of Temple. It's because of the fact of running a business that I can see the problems. My dad has wisely given me the job of paying the bills for our business and seeing the inflows and the outflows. And I see how fast that the money can go. And I would argue that this ordinance affects the small businesses in Temple in both the ways that they make and the way that they spend their money. Also, in the past couple of years, I've become more libertarian in my leanings in politics. The founding principles of our government are to protect the rights of the few from the will of the many. I heard someone recently that was talking in support of this ordinance saying that he thought that all fences should be stained, and he was going on about how he thought all these different details of people's property, how they should look. And I'm afraid that this is the direction that these sort of things go. The majority of people in the last few meetings that have spoken regarding this have been opposed to the ordinance. And yet it continues. It seems also ironic that the city erected a metal building on 31st Street recently on one of the strategic corridors. It seems like the city might be the ones that would set the example if the change is really worth it. And I think this reveals the dilemma that everyone faces in this ordinance. Who can be against beauty? It's like being against children or against universal health care. But beauty or any of these things come at a cost. First of all, I'd like to talk about the cost to the business owner. Material and labor. The Builders Association in a previous meeting provided a chart that showed that the lowest option was twice the cost of a metal building. This doesn't take into account the additional framing required for many applications and a brick ledge or support for a brick. I hate to get into details, but what this results in is an approximate 30% increase in the cost of a building. Now, on a $300,000 project, that's $90,000. On a 30-year note, that means $600 a month. For the small business owner, that affects their livelihood. I know some of you either are or were business owners. Imagine that you had to upgrade your existing facilities to meet these standards. I think that you can see the burden that you're putting on people by doing this. Second, I'd like to talk about the cost of the city. It's contrary to the strategic vision in that it affects the tax base, economic development, supply chain in Temple, and encouraging small businesses. Businesses will have to build elsewhere, live in existing facilities, or increase their prices due to construction and increase taxes because of the value of their property. Or this also affects businesses because they can't compete with outside businesses outside of Temple. We recently lost 2 projects by small margins with TISD and Temple College to businesses outside of Temple, places that don't have these sorts of restrictions and pay the kinds of taxes that those do inside Temple. All these different options for business, except the increase in prices, would cause the city to lose tax revenue. Then I'd like to say that I'm questioning whether or not the ordinance would achieve what it desires. Block buildings crack. Stucco and EIFS require maintenance. They can be damaged. In addition, a large variety of new technology and metal panels allow a better appearance. And if you notice through the city, much of the metal roofing and metal panels that are deteriorating are ones that are of an older technology. The technologies available now are guaranteed for 20 years, and many of them last for 40. I don't want to ignore that there may be some need for some sort of architectural review in the permit process to help builders make a more lasting contribution for the community and to help their customers. But I think it's particularly obvious from reading the ordinance that it was designed to apply to specific corridors, but has been altered to apply to much more of the city. All the references except one have been removed. In addition, I think looking at a recent land use, there aren't many places available for light industrial or heavy industrial. In addition, it doesn't address warehousing, manufacturing, and aviation areas. Finally, I'll conclude with a plea from economics. Don't suffer from loss aversion. I know people have spent hours writing, discussing, and debating this ordinance, but let's not let a sunk cost sink the business owners in Temple with respect to this issue. Don't let the fact that we've spent time going in one direction keep us from going in a better one. At least consider opening more areas or lowering the percentage. At most, let's find ways to personally make Temple a better place and not putting the burden on others. Thank you for your ears.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. I get a little bit of latitude there. I probably should just move you over to the public hearing, and I didn't know your comments, but I didn't want to cut you off since we do have a public hearing later. And anything we want to address, we can do that in the public hearing going forward. So I'd appreciate you being here. Appreciate your comments. Last on the public comments, I'd like to utilize this for myself at this point. I want to bring up 2 issues. First is to thank all those that were involved in the Bloom Temple Festival this weekend. We have a number of folks here that worked extremely hard to put on a great festival. We have our chamber president here, Ken Higdon, was our co-partner and co-worker and planner for the Bloom Temple Festival. Fantastic job, Ken. Thanks to you. Diana Foster, who headed up logistics, just did a phenomenal job of making sure everything got handled, and we had a very, very successful weekend, thanks in large part to the 2 of you, Kenny Martin, who is also one of our co-chairs, and just countless and countless other people. I hate to even start naming people because I'll forget others that have played a significant role this weekend. As I said earlier today at the chamber board meeting, 3 70-degree days with perfectly clear blue skies helps significantly to having a fine weekend, but certainly all the efforts and all the work that went into it by just countless number of volunteers made for a phenomenal weekend. And thanks to everyone that participated for making this a great event. And sometime long about the middle of April of 2009 will be the 4th annual Bloom Temple Festival, for which planning will begin shortly. So hopefully you'll participate and be a part of that event as well. Second, I would like to ask a special lady to come forward, Sharon Rostovich, the airport manager for the 2008 Texas Airport of the Year. let's offer our congratulations and thanks. So, last night in Austin, there was a dinner held in conjunction with the Texas Department of Transportation Aviation Conference, and they handed out some awards for different airport managers and different facilities, best improved airport, and a few of us knew going down there what we were going down there for. Several members of the airport board and several of the council members and myself, and Assistant City Manager Kim, to see Sharon receive that award on behalf of our community. So, congratulations to you. Thank you for having participated in that event, so we could go down there and celebrate with you. So, yeah, thanks to you and your team. You bet. Thanks. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. All items listed under this section of the consent agenda are considered to be routine by the City Council and may be enacted by one motion. If discussion is desired by the City Council, any item may be removed from the consent agenda and at the request of a council member, and it will be considered separately. Council, this is item 5, A through K. Are there any items you wish to be removed for individual consideration or presentation? If not, I'll entertain a motion for item 5, A through K.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented by the staff.
Thank you, Mr. Janzek. We have a motion and a second by Mayor Pro Tem Luna. Is there further discussion? There being none, Madam Secretary.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Item 6, second reading and a public hearing to consider adopting an ordinance amending Section 13 of the City of Temple zoning ordinance to add standards regarding masonry building exteriors. Mr. Dolan?
Mayor and Council, just to provide you some history, starting in April of 2007, the Council directed staff to work on an ordinance with area stakeholders that are part of the city review process for a non-metal building ordinance. And that work lasted approximately 8 months up until December of 2007, where the Council then directed staff to be able to work towards a masonry ordinance and continue to work with the stakeholders on that one. The ordinance that you approved on your first reading back in February 7th went forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission for its meeting on February 18th, where they tabled the item and requested the formation of a working group to look at the ordinance. And it came back in a public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission on April 7th, where it was recommended approval for your second reading this evening. The working group met 3 times, approximately 2 times in February, 1 time in March, and it was chaired by Thomas Baird, who represented Keep Temple Beautiful, and it included some members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and some members of the Chamber of Commerce, and some members of TABA, and some members of the TEDC. And so it fluctuated anywhere from a couple of members from the Planning and Zoning Commission, 3 members of the Chamber of Commerce, 3 to 4 from TABA, and then 3 members from the Chamber of Commerce. We met 3 times to be able to try to review an ordinance. The slides I'm going to try to show you this evening compare what was approved on the first reading and then what is included as the proposed ordinance in your packet this evening, which is actually the second copy that's included in your agenda item. Back on February the 7th, you had looked at the idea for masonry to be included for new construction, expansion, reconstruction, and facade changes citywide. What the work group had looked at were the idea of using masonry for new building construction, but not quite citywide. The applicability also in the proposed ordinance continues to exempt masonry from buildings that are repaired or constructed due to disaster or condemnation, buildings in a designated business park area, buildings zoned either light industrial and high and heavy industrial when it's located out of a strategic corridor and 500 feet or farther away from a residentially zoned land, and also buildings in the agricultural district. The comparison continues to talk about the location. Again, reminding the council on February the 7th, you had recommended it to be citywide. What the proposed group looked at would be for all those areas to apply masonry standards to commercial zoned areas, and those areas zoned industrial when it's next to the following corridors. And that would be Canyon Creek as it travels from 5th to Merriam Road, and Marlinwood from 5th to 31st Street, Lowe's, Raleigh, Kegley, Martin Luther King, Avenue M, Avenue G, Avenue H, 3rd, 57th, 25th, and Highway 36. And this would require masonry standards for those areas that are zoned industrial next to those tracks. To continue on, the idea was looking at the height of where masonry standards would be required. Back on February 7th, it was just looking at the first 2 stories of a building, and through the work of the work group, they acted to say it should be 2 stories or 25 feet vertical height of a building, whichever is lower. The material standards that were looked at back on February the 7th didn't include aggregate, a thin-set masonry, or a smooth-faced block. The proposed ordinance in front of you this evening includes those 3 materials, and in certain percentages, the use of the hardy materials and the smooth-faced block. The proposed hardy type of smooth-faced block, when it would be looked at for the use of apartments, would be able to be covered 100% by a hardy material. The commercial building of a front or a corner lot, the hardy or the smooth-faced block could cover 45% of the area, and then if both are used, then it will be a maximum of 45% total. And so you will see as we work our way through for the maximum percentage, if you try to combine it, it wouldn't be 90%, it would be 45%. Also, the idea for the proposed ordinance was that if you were looking at an interior lot, the sides and the rear could contain 100% smooth-faced block. The comparison continues to look at what was proposed in February the 7th was a maximum of 80% or minimum of 80% to be covered for the masonry material. That percentage has been lowered to 70%. Also, when we discussed the rear of the rear facade of a building, it did include where it was not visible from a right-of-way, it would need to be screened. That "and" was changed to "or," which allows more non-masonry to occur in more circumstances. The comparison continues when you look at building articulation, and that could contain some features similar to insets or protrusions, columns, spanways, arches, etc. When you had looked at your ordinance for February the 7th, it was a minimum of 5-foot difference inset or protrusion. What had been looked at for your proposed ordinance, if the structure is less than 100,000 square feet, it would be a 2-foot difference. And then for those structures that are greater than 100,000 square feet, that 5-foot vertical difference remains. The idea for looking for an appeal continues the same, but contains some more criteria. Both the concept plan and a material palette would continue to be used so the planning department, construction safety department could review those in the form of a building permit. But there is now a detailed checklist for the applicant to consider advances in masonry products and keeps the concept plan and material palette in check. And the idea is that it also adds is that if there were some berming or some type of landscaping or other things that would be used, or if it met some type of architectural theme for the applicant, that remains in place. So the Planning and Zoning Commission had reviewed this in the public hearing at its last meeting, and by a vote of 5-3, required for the masonry ordinance as it was proposed in the outline, and also to be able to move forward to your second reading this evening. I'd be glad to answer any questions that the council has regarding this issue. And there are approximately 7 people in the meeting this evening that did work as part of the working group that met the 3 times in February and March.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Council, questions for staff before we go to the public hearing?
Mr. Mayor, I guess I have a parliamentary question first. The ordinance as it came to us a month ago, is that, and we tabled it to go and send it back to planning and zoning, is that part over with?
Actually, we didn't table it.
What is the where does that first
Well,
ordinance lie?
you approved that ordinance on first reading. that ordinance would require a second reading. So today you have two options before you. You can continue to consider on second reading, which you're posted to do, the ordinance you approved on first reading, which is the one Mr. Dolan is referring to as, I guess, the original ordinance in the first reading. Or you can, acting on the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission, amend that ordinance to reflect the proposed changes made or recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission, or do something in between.
Not a question. But can we actually move that first one forward? Because that does not come to us from planning and zoning with a
Well,
recommendation.
No, it doesn't. But you approved it on first reading. You have to have a recommendation. Under our policies, you do not have to act and approve it exactly as they recommended it to you. It's just, you cannot approve an ordinance on second reading without a recommendation from them. So you've got a
So
recommendation.
technically speaking, we could
Yes.
basically revert back to what we did
You
originally
can,
and
because
say that was a
It's
modification.
a
of
more
what was
restrictive
recommended.
version of what is recommended.
So if and I guess I had the same question, Mayor, is if the original was brought forth with the motion that the P&Z did not hear and vote on.
Right.
They voted on something totally different. Okay? So they basically didn't vote on the one that we, in the first reading, approved, that was approved.
No, sir.
Well,
Just
they
for point of
had a-
clarification, they recommended tabling that item at its meeting February
I'm talking-
18th.
Well,
But the P&Z never voted on the
No.
one that was approved by the
No,
council,
they
correct?
chose not to, just as you have the option of approving on first or second reading a different version of it. They chose to do something a little bit different, and that recommendation is what came up to you. I mean, when I read our zoning ordinance, it says you will not approve a change in the zoning ordinance without a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission. And that was, so in first reading, you, based on a staff recommendation, you considered something in first reading. That was presented to them, as well as the original, I mean, this is getting complicated, but there was an original staff version. At that first P&Z meeting, back, I guess it was February, they had the benefit of both the version you'd approved on first reading and the original staff version. They ultimately have taken action to recommend to you a third version, which reflects some additional staff work with stakeholder groups. That is their recommendation to you today. So you can, in my opinion, you can act on their recommendation. You can go back to your original one on first reading, which is more restrictive than that, or something in between.
Had they not approved that version and we went back to the original version, would you still have to have a supermajority? I mean, because they didn't vote on, what was that? That's
They
kind
wouldn't
of,
have sent that to us. And so it would not have come to us. So we wouldn't have had anything to
Yeah.
vote on.
All I know is what they've said to you. Again, it's a little bit different than it's a rezoning of a specific property where they are recommending a rezoning of a particular property from, say, ag to commercial. It's a little bit different than that. It's a change to the zoning ordinance or standards. You have a recommendation from them, which you must have before you can make a final change. And so I think you have the latitude within the broad language of your advertised ordinance to adopt either their version or your original version, which is more restrictive.
Thank you, sir. Other questions? Mr. Janzak, is that?
Yes, thank you.
Your question? Okay. Other questions for staff? There being none, this item requires a public hearing, or we're posted for a public hearing. And because of the significance and the change, I think we decided that we would suspend the public hearing after the first hearing and then reconvene at this point. So this item on second reading is open for a public hearing at this time. Anyone wishing to speak before the council on this item, please come forward, state your name and address for the record prior to making your comments, please. Ms. Luck, how do you do? Thank you.
Thanks. Susan Lott. You need address or just, I represent planning and zoning.
Chairman of the Planning and
Chairman.
Zoning is sufficient.
And we do bring back or we actually present to you. We felt like it came in a little bit different form. Normally, they come from P&Z to City Council, and this went from staff recommendation straight to City Council and then back to P&Z. So I think that's where we had the original, and then we looked at, or your original that you voted on with some changes, and we felt like there were still some concerns from City Council plus stakeholders, and so we tabled it and put it back with stakeholders because we felt like this was pretty serious and intense for our community in making these changes. Based on hearing input from the stakeholders and also from P&Z members who served on that committee, it was very well expressed at P&Z that all members of the committee and stakeholders felt very free and open in sharing their concerns for the community, for small business, for other businesses to come and existing businesses. And we felt like they did an excellent job in looking at all of those concerns and everybody's interest, and formulated a consensus before they brought back a plan for us to review. And there were still some concerns expressed from P&Z members as well as from community stakeholders speaking at the public hearing. There were also some amendment sought to include regarding private business parks, and that was not voted in as part of the recommendation as going back to strategic corridors over being citywide. And then, as Mr. Dolan pointed out, from a vote of 5 for and 3 against, we felt like that this was an excellent overview and inclusion from all stakeholders, and we felt like this is what was best in looking at for the city. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer those.
Thank you for bringing that to us, and thank you for your work. Mrs. Luck,
Yes,
I noticed from the minutes of the Planning and Zoning Commission, there were 2 amendments that were offered.
Yes, sir.
As I think you had reflected, one on private parks and then the other one on
Going back to strategic corridors instead of
and the
citywide.
votes ended up to be 4-4.
That's correct.
How would you interpret those results? I mean, is that, I guess what concerns me, there's a lack of consensus there. When we see that kind of 4-4, there's still, I'm not seeing unanimity there with the position of your committee on either of those 2. Could you comment on that? I felt it was the feeling by both parties that perhaps the stakeholder group had not addressed the private business park, and that there was still interest in that being included as one of the exemptions. Also felt it had been expressed by P&Z members who served on that committee that people had opportunities to include that if they wanted, and it was not included. And so I think you saw a division of there, as well as the strategic corridor. I think overall, I think we, as per our vote reflected, I think overall that what we brought to you was the consensus and agreement by P&Z. But I still think for every person you talk with, there's still some concern and interest in specific points. So I think that's a reflection of Mr. Janzay. Okay, thank you very much for that. I know, and thank you. I know it's not been an easy process that Planning and Zoning has gone through, and I appreciate your leadership and guidance with that.
Thank you. I will say that I think if you had asked us on February the 18th, after about 2 hours of discussion of what to do, I don't think we really wanted to table it that evening, but I think hindsight being 20/20, I really believe that was the best move we could make for the community. Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak at this time?
Hi, Mayor, council members. Troy Glasson, Temple Area Builders Association, 12 North 5th. I stand before you this evening as a stakeholder on the masonry ordinance. I appreciate very much the opportunity on behalf of my organization to participate in this process. Appreciate the work that the staff has done in guiding us and the commissioners have done in listening to all of the arguments for and against. And I am up here before you tonight to let you know that our association, from our standpoint, has taken a neutral position on this ordinance. I'm testifying not for or against tonight. Just to let you know, I've heard from members that some would say that this is a necessary step for beautification purposes of our city. Others have adamantly opposed any kind of new regulations, so I've sort of been on the fence the whole time throughout this process, and it has been difficult, but there have been hours and hours of discussion. A lot of leaders throughout the community have come to the table to participate in the talks, and again, I'm just grateful to have been a part of that. We have made some steps in the right direction as far as our group is concerned, going from what was a citywide ordinance to an ordinance that's not quite as overwhelming, but still is extensive. It's pretty much a blanket approach with some holes in the blanket is, I guess, the best way I could describe it at this point. We have also taken existing businesses and expansions out of the scenario, and that they will no longer be impacted, and that's a major step in terms of the way that our organization looks at it to improving this ordinance. Also have expanded the materials list, as Mr. Dolan noted, and appreciate the steps taken in that regard. There are, I don't think anybody at this table, the stakeholders that is, was completely satisfied. There were some issues in the ordinance that we didn't go as far as moving towards what we would have liked to have seen as we would hope, but that's part of the process. We reached consensus, and that doesn't mean that everybody is necessarily happy. I'm up here really just to make those brief comments and answer any questions that you guys might have.
Troy, is it the folks that may be against or for, let's say some of your, in your organization, someone that might be for this, are they totally for exactly with presenting in front of us?
I've not heard from anybody that they're completely satisfied with this ordinance, no. Not in my organization.
Any things that you can maybe elaborate on that to change this or change that specifically that may turn that to a larger percentage that would be for it? And anything that comes to mind specifically?
There are a couple of items, but I hesitate to bring them forward simply because the stakeholders have done so much work on this, and these issues have been hashed out in the stakeholders meeting, and I feel like a level of consensus was reached. I'll just give you examples, not that I'm up here asking y'all to make any changes, but I would say that the percentage, the 70% impact is fairly extensive as far as a lot of people in my group are concerned. The height requirement, the need to really pinpoint where the business parks are that are going to be taken off the table would have been some things that we would have liked to have dug a little further into, so to speak. But that's just to answer your question.
When you read this ordinance, as Tim presented it earlier, and I'm not too smart. When you presented it sounds like it's kind of confusing to me as to what really works. Has there been any concern about that? I mean, as far as all the ifs, this, that, it seems pretty complex.
And that's probably a fair statement. It is complex, and I would say that's probably because we did hash out so many different issues and did bring so many different ideas and what-ifs to the table, and we tried to account for as much as we possibly can at the table, and we did the absolute best job that we can, and I'm hopeful that we included enough provisions in the ordinance that if somebody were to want to build a metal building in Temple, there is a process that would allow for them to get some consideration in that regard. So hopefully it's all that language that is in the ordinance is in there to help and not to hinder progress.
You would say, though, it was a good compromise was made on both sides. Everybody met in the middle reasonably.
I'd say a compromise was reached.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say, going back to the discussion that you had with the city attorney, if there is a chance that y'all go back to the original ordinance that you sent to the commissioners, I would say that we are completely opposed to that. So, just an FYI. Okay?
Thank you for the work. Thank you for the opportunity to dialogue and brainstorm with the organization. I know I personally did that, and it was very helpful to me, Troy, after we had our meeting in which we passed the first reading that we did and laid that out, and it was immensely helpful for the dialogue that we had, and I appreciate your entire organization for the work they've put into this, and I know it was painstaking, not just since we did this, but over the last year since we considered the metal building ordinance, as we called it, and now the masonry provision. So again, express our appreciation for all the work that has been done by your group, and again, we continue to look forward to continue dialogue. This has a review provision in it, so it requires us in a year to look at this and address some of the issues that maybe Mr. Schneider's just brought up, the difficulty of interpretation does it end up being convoluted and confusing, and in a year then we'll have the opportunity to look at those things and see if we can't resolve those issues if they turn out to be factual. So thanks to you for all you've done.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. You spent quite a bit of time visiting with us, and you heard all of our concerns, and I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to come and talk to our group about that. Our key concern is that we don't want to do anything that would drive business away from our economy, and so that's where our reservations stem from. I appreciate you. Thanks.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Okay, which one of you two is going to speak?
The cute one.
It's been a long time since somebody said I was a cute one.
The cute one just walked away.
Thomas Baird, 707 West Thompson, and thank you all for allowing me to come and speak. I'm here as I was the chairman of the stakeholders group that met several times, as Mr. Dillon said. It was a very good meeting. All of our meetings were very good, well attended. There was very lively discussion. There was a lot of compromise. Now, I would respectfully disagree slightly with what Troy said. I think the compromise was maybe 80%, 20%. I'm just kidding. It was really a very, very good compromise situation, and there was a lot of discussions, a lot of ifs, ands, and buts to try to deal with all the various issues and all the various groups. And I think it was a very healthy discussion. It was a very detailed discussion, and by the end at the end of that process, well, I would say first that usually when you have something that's worthwhile, neither side is totally happy. And as we got through at the end, I don't think any of the various groups were totally happy, but all of the groups that were reflected there, I think, said they could live with what we came up with. And we had done the best, balancing as much as we could for all the competing interests. And so, and again, there was discussions, as Mayor, as you stated, that in a year we can come back and after we have some practical experience to see what may need to be tweaked. But I believe that this proposed ordinance that was passed by P&Z is a very good ordinance. It's well thought out. It's not perfect, but it's a great start, and I think it can be a great benefit to our community. And I would, on behalf of Keep Temple Beautiful, on behalf of the Stakeholders Committee, and a number of citizens I've been in contact, we would ask that you accept this recommendation, P&Z, and pass this ordinance as been presented to you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. Appreciate your work. Thank you for your leadership with the stakeholders.
Well, I didn't come prepared to speak, Mayor, but my name is Wes Corbin, and I own a little fast food restaurant out on Old West Adams, 2305, called Big Choo Choo. I probably have the newest all-metal building on that whole right-of-way from here all the way to the lake. And it's going to affect me, certainly is. And all I'm saying is, if you drive out and take a look at my building, it's red, white, and blue, and it's white. And if anybody would build a building like that, keep it clean, which we intend to, it certainly is not going to detract from the looks of the city. And I didn't, honestly, I kind of sat on around. I didn't know this was all going on until just a day or two ago. I read a little in the paper about it. And I didn't intend to come down here and speak, but I just want to throw that out, because I'm certainly going to be affected probably as much or more than anybody as a small business owner. And it is costly. And just take a look at an all-metal building like that, kept clean, certainly does not distract from the city. And thank you for your time.
Mayor, my name is Ken Higdon. I represent the Temple Chamber of Commerce. We were one of the stakeholders to North 5th Street. I want to thank you for the opportunity to come today. Everything I'm saying today is something I've said in past meetings with this council and with this P&Z. We are one of those stakeholders that said we could, in fact, live with this. Our board met this morning and actually had a discussion again about this ordinance. There is still some concerns as we look at small business. As we asked Manager Faust to actually pull up a map of LI and HI and non-corridor areas where you could actually build a metal building in the city. And once we looked at that map, I will tell you that there aren't many places that a small business can build a metal building in this community to get started. Having said that, we've already have seen at this council meeting someone who came and was looking at a service-type business building a metal building that may no longer be looking at the city limits, inside the city limits of Temple, Texas. And again, that is our concern. We're concerned about small businesses having the opportunity to get started in an affordable building, one that they can grow in and continue to prosper in. Having said that, we appreciate the opportunity to be a part of the stakeholders group. As you've stated, Mayor, it has been a long and tedious process. We again have had some good discussions. We've met a lot of great people that have participated in this, but our concern remains the same, taking care of who our membership consists of. About 70% of our membership is small business. Even today, with Robert Stinson's article in the Telegram, we received several calls waving the red flag and saying, "Wait a minute." And I said, "Well, the minute we waited was too long. This is going down the pike pretty quick." But I will stand in front of the council again and state the concerns. So I've done that, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins.
Ken, with your group, would there be more folks in favor of that, your board or whoever, if it was not citywide, if it was more controlled to major corridors, gateways, and would it be more, I guess, a positive deal for the chamber for that, which would create additional areas for this to happen for small businesses? Or?
If you could look at the corridors that are listed in there, it covers a large majority of the city. It is significant. But however, it does allow things to happen in the industrial parks, both the north and the southeast. There are some other areas that are not affected in that. Without a doubt, I think the corridor plan that we originally had come up with was a good plan, and we've added corridors since that time. So I would believe, though I couldn't be 100%, I actually had a phone call a few months ago that we wanted every building to be 100% masonry. So I've had those calls too, in all fairness. I had one of those, but the majority of my calls have been the opposite way, and I think the corridor situation would be more accepted by my constituents.
So when you say the corridor way, it
Using
is
the-
predominantly corridor driven right now.
It is.
But the expansion of the corridors is what you're saying. Too many corridors and effectively makes it citywide.
It is citywide, and the corridors, if you're going to have an LI or an HI section to build on, you have to be at least 500 feet from residential, and you have to be off those corridors. And it is citywide, so it doesn't leave there's not much land there. If you kept it on the corridors, so you're a block off the corridor, you could build that building, still have an effect with the residential folks, because you don't want to hinder the residential area. But I think that would be a better way to do it. But
Okay. I
that's
just
not
wanna make
something
sure I understood
that's not
what you
something
meant
the group went for. So.
Okay. Very good, sir. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'm Gene Engbrock, 1512 East Central. Been out there for 55 years. And I've been a contractor for a long time. This concerns me a lot because I know that there's going to be quite a few small builders that cannot afford masonry. Another thing that I'm concerned about, been concerned since I've been on the east side, is nothing much happens out there, but one of these days it's going to have to happen because the city of Temple doesn't have much way to go anywhere, any other direction. When we do this kind of an ordinance, we're not only saying, change the siding of this building to brick. We're changing the foundation requirements and everything else, because your engineers are not going to do anything out here in this black soil, for instance, in East Temple, without a whole lot more engineering because of the brick. And I just think this is something that you fellows need to, and ladies need to, really consider before you put it into an ordinance. I'm a concerned citizen. I'm a prior construction person, and I still look at everything that's going on in Temple, and I'm really concerned that this is the beautification of it. As this one gentleman said, metal buildings, the people have been striving. I've been selling metal buildings for 40 years, and they're striving to be beautiful as well as economical. And I don't really think we need to do something like this to possibly hurt our drive. We've got a good thing going here in Temple. Home builders, I'm sure, are glad these people move in. And they get more homes. It doesn't affect the homes that much because they're mostly brick anyway. But we're talking about the people that actually keep this place going. And I think we need to consider that. And I really think that right now, with the way construction is, the cost of it and everything else, this is a long move. If I got any questions, I'm glad to answer them. But that's the way I feel about it, and that's why when I saw the thing here a while back, I didn't really care that much for it, but I saw this morning's paper that it had developed, so I felt like it's about time to get up here and say something. So that's why I'm here. I used to have that guy working for me when he's a pup out of school. But anyway, I would, that's my concern, and I hope you'll consider that what's the best for Temple. Beauty is fine, but you got to be economical also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I did not come prepared to talk about metal buildings today, but I've got to ask one question that does affect my livelihood and my client's livelihood, and that's, we haven't talked about glass, and I wasn't sure if glass exterior is considered to be masonry or the 70% rule and so forth. So that was one of the questions I had for you.
I think it's exempted from the calculation.
It is.
Mr. Dolan?
Yes, windows, doors, and roofs are exempt.
It's talking like a
From
glass
the
wall.
calculation.
We want to build a 2-story glass office building, is that, that'll meet guidelines?
Please do, tomorrow.
I will tell you that the metal building ordinance has prevented another dealership from purchasing land next to the Toyota dealership that's on the interstate. They're waiting to see the outcome of this, but it's very likely that transaction will not occur as a result of this.
Say that again for me.
We had a dealership, another automotive dealership that was, had land under contract next to Don Ringler's, and I assume Don Ringler's building, I believe it's a metal building or a big part of it's metal, would not meet the current guidelines or the proposed guidelines. But this particular dealership, in looking at the new ordinance, has put everything on hold and waiting to see the outcome of this, because when you start building a dealership, and as you know, most dealerships are metal, nice-looking facilities, but that dealership is put on hold pending the outcome of this new ordinance, which would be several millions of dollars in terms of construction.
That's a misnomer, though. I mean, it does not exclude decorative metals. It does not, I mean, there's the permitting process. It does not exclude requirements, what it was, the national, there's a lot of opportunities for, I mean, I'm assuming it's not just a used car dealership.
That's correct, but there's no such thing as a national dealership in terms, most dealerships.
Well, there are design standards.
I realize that, but most of those are metal.
Sure, but they incorporate decorative metals. They don't just, they for the most part, don't throw up an entire metal building or series of buildings that are the corrugated tin. They, like John Ringler's building, incorporates a lot of different decorative metals, glass, and a lot of different things like that in the design standards. And I don't think through the permitting, through the exception process, that the standards that a national automobile manufacturer would have would be anything that we would not provide. I can't envision a scenario that we would not provide an exception to that, like it's built into the ordinance.
But Mr. Jeter, what I'll tell you is a lot of people don't want to go through the risk and the headache factor and so forth of going through that process. And so these are hurdles we're putting up for businesses that are potentially wanting to move into our area, when there's other areas that they can go into, other communities that maybe be on their punch list of 5 or 6 areas, and they're looking at which areas are either easier to develop, and don't have the hurdles that we might have or other communities might have. And so this is one hurdle that they have decided that they don't want to deal with if they don't have to, and they'll move on to their second choice.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Anyone else wishing to address this issue? I appreciate each and every one of you for taking the time to come and speak this evening. Anyone else? Seeing no one else wishing to speak, I'll declare the public hearing closed. Counsel?
Mayor, a couple of questions. I mean, just like Mr. G was saying earlier about more than likely that would be exempted. That's kind of what I was kind of talking about earlier, as far as the complexity of, do you meet this, do you meet that, do you meet this? I mean, there are going to be potential businesses that do not want to climb those hurdles. It's extra hurdles, and then to even read that and understand, can they even climb those hurdles? I mean, what is the expense for doing all those things? And they know the expense of a building they've built before. If it's a car dealership, they're pretty much probably got those down pretty pat as far as how much per square foot and all those types of things, and all the rules and regulations for different dealerships. But there'll be those that pick up the ordinance and say there's a masonry ordinance, and that's as far as it's going to go. And so, well, I guess they'll allow metal building in Temple, Texas. That's not true. They have a way to appeal that, but you have to go through the appeal process. which is another hurdle, and, then they might not be aware there is an appeal process just by the first glimpse of it. So that's I wish there was a way we could simplify this, where there was a really simple, deal. I had to,
As I read this ordinance, as is presented and brought to us from Planning and Zoning, the way I understand it, Mr. Dolan, please correct me if I'm misinterpreting what this is. It says staff has the administrative ability to grant the exceptions. If somebody comes with a design, and it's a structural metal building, staff has as easy a time granting that as they would a building permit, as long as the I's were dotted and T's were crossed, and I don't think there's any extraordinary hurdle in that. It doesn't require it to come to council. They have the opportunity to come to council if it's denied, and they can appeal. Am I interpreting this correctly?
That's correct interpretation.
So I don't know. I don't know what the huge hurdle is that's being referenced to bringing a request to have an architectural design considered that happens to incorporate metal in it.
So we believe that staff would look past the masonry ordinance and look at maybe it goes here and work here and work there, or do you believe that they're going to take that plan and say it's not 60? I mean, they're very adamant, as I read through the minutes of the meetings that Thomas and them had. They're very adamant about even decreasing the percentage. So that tells me they're going to do pretty precise calculations on masonry and all those types of things. Well, if it doesn't meet, I mean, it just seems to me that those precise percentages are going to be calculated, and that I don't think there's going to be in favor of building a metal building or not. I mean,
I can't.
I mean,
I just can't imagine that it's going to. This all happens in a vacuum.
Well, I understand, but if you have a masonry ordinance, like any checklist, if you don't, that's the way they do it now. Try to get a plan through planning and zoning and all those and staff. They have requirements and checklists, which are great, and they need to be there, but they have to be met. And when they're not met, you go meet them first and bring it back. So and they're going to go by those guidelines, because if we're going to create an ordinance, they need to go by the guidelines, not just say, well, we'll let that slide, or, yeah, it's okay in this scenario. I think we're, if it's going to be a metal building and it needs to be appealed, it needs to be appealed and brought to, because it's going against what's been written there and what a lot of folks have been working on. So I don't think, when I'm saying that, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of flexibility in what that ordinance has said, because it's lots of specifics in there.
I'll bet if something comes to staff that there's a question about, I'll bet it'll get some additional review up the line to see if it's something that we're ready to throw somebody out of our community from potentially coming in our community, and to get a reading that we don't have to wait necessarily 12 months for it to come back to council, so that we can say, well, you shouldn't have done this one, you shouldn't have done that one, you shouldn't have done that one that way, but we had to wait the year. Like I said, it's not going to be done in a vacuum.
I understand, but they got to come here before we throw them out, and that concerns me. It just concerns me that, and I voted against it last time. Personally, I'm totally against it, personally, but if the constituents that I represent and the people that that I'm supposed to represent, I'm supposed to vote the way the constituents feel. And I see some commonality, I see some okay, and some not. I see the people that represent the home builders. They're not willing to say yes or no. They're still on the fence. They're neutral. It's on the fence. And that concerns me. I think that if we were to consider something in small chunks and build on it and see if it works in an area, see if it works, and monitor that, then put in a year's time or something like that, sunset it, and make it come back to this council and have a report and say, okay, this worked or it didn't work, and we'll go through the process somewhat, and we can tweak it and vote on it again. That might be okay, but to do it totally in the whole city right away, I don't hear the constituents saying that's okay. Totally. I mean, I don't hear that.
And that's why they brought back a less than the whole city proposition to us and didn't want to address the one that we sent to them in the first reading, which was a whole city. We had a lot of very bright, very concerned citizens that worked hard to bring this proposal to planning and zoning and thus to us. And planning and zoning obviously went through quite a bit of angst as they considered the different options as well, and didn't bring us a unanimous decision, which is not required, by the way, for our consideration. So a lot of people went to a lot of work, and
You bet, and they did a great job. I commend them for that, but again,
I appreciate your concern as well.
Could I ask Mr. Deo, in your opinion, in your experience, what is the cost that a company like the dealership that you mentioned would incur to file for a permit to build their building?
In compliance.
In compliance. What does it cost to put together everything that the city asks for in order to get a permit to build that dealership? How much money?
Well, typically you're making be anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 before it's all over. By the time you do engineering and demographic studies and soil test, and to get to the point of ready to move forward with the building process. And I would prefer to see, and I do a lot of stuff in this community, and I'm a big proponent of beautification. I don't think anybody can dispute that. I've done one of the biggest beautification jobs in the city of Temple on a major corridor. But I don't think that the small business people or developers or buyers or whomever are going to be happy with a subjective appeals process in terms of, I think they'd rather go through the zoning board of adjustments if they're like we do any other variance that we're looking for, and that's what we're doing, is we're asking for a variance for an ordinance versus some subjective person at the city who has to approve whether or not we're going to have some leeway on the percentage or whatever that might be. They're not going to rely on that and then have to go, if that's denied, then go through the council process. And I think that the process might be better served to go through the normal zoning board adjustments.
Sure. They're not willing to risk $20,000 to $50,000
Not at all.
to have somebody ultimately say no.
That's right. And there are dozens of examples I could give you where the cost of a metal building is not just the cost to the owner. There, President of our chambers talked about a new business getting started. Well, it's not necessarily the new business that are going out buying a building, but it also could be the guy who wants to lease a building and wants to lease to get started. Well, the rental rates across the board are going to have to increase. I mean, that's just all there is to it. I mean, if there has to be more money put into the asset, there's got to be more money to pay for it. And it's not going to come out of typically your owner's pocket, it'll come out of the tenant's pocket. So it's going to affect a lot of businesses, not just those who want to go and build a building, but also the small business that wants to lease a building as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have another question for the staff. Mr. Dolan, can you explain what your vision would be of the review procedures for this proposed ordinance?
First, it would require a building permit. And secondly, when you look at on page 6 of the proposed ordinance, and it was the same way on the existing ordinance from the one that you had approved first reading February 7th, there's several criteria that you could use in your review for the building permit, and it talks about the types of articulation that may be used, and it's been described briefly, the archways, the canopies, the insets, the recesses, to be able to provide some type of variation for whatever that horizontal plane is. And then also it talks about the amount of possibility of screen walls or berming or topography or landscaping to take those into consideration.
Yeah, excuse me, I'm sorry, I think you
So
perhaps
those would be the things that
misunderstood
would be reviewed.
Right, the annual review that was proposed under 13-00, subparagraph 2.
Not necessarily an annual review, it would be what would be reviewed against a project coming in for a building permit.
No.
As far as the annual review, that would be...
This ordinance will be reviewed 1 year from the adoption date by the city council.
I
Tell me what I would
question.
expect to hear from you a year from now.
You would hear whatever projects came forward through the building permit process that required a special permit, and would be happy to provide that information to you earlier if it did start to be able to show some type of trend. But it would be those things that we had X number of building permits come forward through the Construction Safety Department and through the normal review process to get a permit, and out of the commercial buildings, the non-residential buildings, that this many required a special permit.
How do we account for Mr. Deo's dealership?
It would have to first, again, come through the building permit, and then depending upon what kind of articulation or whatever sorts of things that it would bring to the to the design of the building, those things would be brought under review. And you can see as clearly as I can on the proposed ordinance, those type of things would be looked at. Without knowing what that building elevation would look like, it's hard to surmise to be able to provide you an answer this evening because nothing has been turned in. And there are many other factors to be able to take into consideration. So you don't have a building elevation for a car dealership in front of us this evening.
So, and I'm not going to ask you to make a ruling based on what I'm going to say, but I'm going to use this as an example and merely say, do you mean to tell me if somebody came to the city and said, I would like to build a car dealership similar to the Wrangler, Toyota, or Chevrolet dealership, do you think something similar to that would be acceptable?
Yes, sir.
And you're saying, I'm not going to answer you till you bring me a building permit for that building.
Well,
you have to spend the $20,000 to $50,000 to do all that preliminary work to bring the building permit before I'll give you any ruling or reading at all? Is that what you just said? Or will we give somebody a preliminary meeting to be able to give them an indication whether they are wasting $20,000 to $50,000 if they don't want to build a masonry building versus that they've got a pretty good chance of having it passed if it is as similar to that as they might make it seem when they come for that preliminary indication?
I can tell you how it's going to work. They're going to skip those guys and come to the council people and buy lunch and say, what do you think about this? And I say, we would love to have that in Temple, and they're going to go to the other council people, and they're going to pay and for lunch. And then,
Well, I'm not glad.
but then the council's going to say, we would love to see this. And, I mean, that's how they're going. It happens today. I mean, we get calls, what do you think about this? What do you think? And we give them our feedback. And if they give 3 or more council people that say, you know what, being as we are comfortable, and that we can't give you a guarantee, but we would be excited about a project like this. I mean, that's how it works.
But the way the ordinance that you have in front of you this evening is predicated on a building permit. If there were language put in there similar to what we have for our DRC, the Design Review Committee, that we would look at some type of sketch plan, concept plan, to be able to offer comments on it, if that type of language were included, I think that would be beneficial. But that wasn't part of the discussion this evening. So I'm answering the question as far as the way the ordinance is written for the proposed ordinance.
And so you feel compelled to have to tell that individual, I cannot give you a response unless you bring me a building permit.
The way the ordinance in front of you this evening is predicated on a permit. If there was language in there to be able to say, look at some sort of sketch plan or concept plan, that is even better.
Tim, could you direct us to what you're saying about the building permit, because I don't recall that in here. On a daily basis, our planning department meets with people, and people bring in things on napkins and everything else, and we do the best that we can to advise them. There are specific things. One of the things that the stakeholders did in this process was to be very deliberate about the things that they thought staff and council should consider when we're looking at doing exceptions. And Tim was referring to that on page 6, section 10. For your review, if that kind of answers the kind of questions, things that we would be looking for. But in answer to, would someone have to make a significant investment to get a feel for whether it was going to be approved or not? My opinion of the ordinance is no, it would not. They could bring in very, hand-drawn sketches and say, here's my idea. I would put some landscaping here or a berm, and that would help mitigate the metal, and then it would be considered by the staff, and we could give them feedback on the ordinance in that regard.
Certainly
and they would have a pretty good idea.
I don't want to be contrarian But when you look at the purpose, number one, it's basically based on both versions. It just it clearly states that it's as part of the building permit process. And so that when we had looked at it, and if it was different, I agree with Kim in the way that we look at things through the DRC or in the planning department and things that we cooperate with the fire and engineering and the Parks and Leisure Department, that sort of thing. But if you looked at to try to tweak the purpose of it to include for those things that weren't part of the building permit process, but the preliminary review or the feasibility or the whatever type of study group in the time period to decide on a project, that could be expanded.
Tim, when you mention articulation and you need to show me what it looks like, arcs, doodads, or whatever you put on there, I mean, so you're going to have some kind of elevation drawing to scale to all those types. So, I mean, aren't you going to have to have almost a complete set of plans? I mean, not just a footprint, not just a soils report, but a full set of elevations, and it may or may not work. Is that, I mean, probably would have to, wouldn't you think?
You would have to work on an elevation, and a lot of times through the commercial process for someone coming in to try to say, I'm interested in doing this at this location, it's not that uncommon for them to be able to provide some type of building elevation. I mean, it might not be done by an architect or some type of design professional, but there's enough information there that is drawn legibly and labeled correctly.
And to scale, so you
And
can
to scale.
calculate those percentages.
Right, so you
that
can
we talked
calculate
about.
those percentages.
Right.
But what started the
Pretty close.
discussion was a national auto dealer. Just like a Cracker Barrel, everybody has in their mind what most people have in their mind what a Cracker Barrel looks like. And you could be comfortable saying, if that's the same kind of standards that you're building all over the country and in all the other communities in Texas that have masonry ordinances, then unless you're trying to do something different. I mean, there are design standards that automobile manufacturers have. They'll say they have, even to some point, they have plans. I mean, they can show we're going to build something like this with a photo. And I mean, it's not something that I think would come in from whatever dealer we don't have that we might get on a napkin. I think they're going to come in with photos. They're going to come in and say, this is what we're thinking.
Other comments or questions? Can I close the public hearing?
I want to ask 2 questions before we close the public hearing.
We did close the public hearing.
Oh, it is.
But you can still,
Okay. Well, I'm confused. Mr. Ford believes that this ordinance will affect his building, which is already built, and I just wanted to know how that would be.
It would.
Well, that's what I thought. Okay, and then Mr. Deo says if somebody wants to lease a building, it's a building standing there, this ordinance is not going to affect it either.
I think he was referring to in the future, if somebody builds a building and they have to build one that meets this ordinance, it's going to be more expensive, which is going to make the lease rates more expensive, which might preclude somebody from leasing buildings. Is that a fairly accurate reflection of your comment? Yeah.
Specifically an office warehouse is a great example. We're going to double the rent on office warehouse.
Thank you.
If there are no other comments or questions, council, your pleasure on the second reading. Consideration of the ordinance presented to us from the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the ordinance as presented from Planning and Zoning. Is there further discussion?
Can I make a motion to amend that?
You may.
Amend? It's limited to some said quarters that to be determined from the original discussion we had in the ordinance, and that there is a sunset provision put on it, not just a review, but a sunset provision put on it that would require that come back to the council for an amendment or review to be voted on in 1 year. And let's see.
Do you have specific corridors that you want eliminated from the list of corridors?
I would go back to what we approved. I mean, I can mention those, but what we approved last meeting, we approved with those courts.
last meeting we did citywide.
Well, what was suggested last meeting.
So,
He wants to
And-
motion to
and let me
approve
just-
the original ordinance before it was before I amended it. That's what you're basically saying.
Yeah. We had quarters.
a lot of other changes in the set.
Well,
Unless you're
that
referring to
with-
component.
With the addition to a sunset provision, and that, come back to the council in a year.
Let me just ask, Mr. Jeter made the motion before we worry about, would you be willing to accept that amendment, that style of amendment? If you would, then we can go back and clarify those particular areas.
No.
Then we don't,
So you can't amend a motion and vote on it, and then go back and.
know if he won't accept your amendment, and I think what
Don't
happens
think
is
so.
we either have to vote this one up or down, and then you can come back and make another motion. But Mr.
I don't
Grant?
think so.
Can we take a short break here?
We can.
All right.
So we'll.
I can answer that question quickly if you'd like. We do not operate under the Robert's Rules of Evidence. We operate under simple rules of the mayor in the sense that a simple motion and a second, you will vote on that, and you can either you move forward on that motion if you get 3 affirmative votes or you don't.
So it's a race who makes the first motion?
Well, you've got a motion and a second on the floor. You've got a motion. You've got a motion to amend that motion. I don't know if there was a second to that yet. If you got a second, you could vote.
Motion and a second.
I think you could vote on whether to amend the original motion. If you got a second on that and you had 3 affirmative votes to do that.
Okay, well, okay.
So what I'm still confused. I mean, so whoever makes the motion first, you're going to go ahead and second it, and then you got to vote on if it's done, it's done?
I'm suggesting that there's a motion and the second on the floor. You've made a motion to amend the motion that's been seconded. And if there's a second to that, you could vote on that.
Vote on the amendment.
If I get a second to that type of...
Yes, sir.
And so if the amendment is accepted through the voting process, then the amendment is attached, or
Then the
original motion is modified
amended. Exactly.
accordingly. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. So, at which point...
Is that confusing enough?
No, at which point, if that's what we want, if that's the way we work, then what we need to do is delineate your entire motion, your entire amendment. Spell it all out, what it is that you want to see, so that it's clear to everybody that's voting on that what it is that we're going to vote on. So, if you'll go to page 103 of 140 on your agenda today, and that's beginning under item 6 of the designation of strategic corridor streets for properties zoned LI or HI. And then it reads, the following public streets and highways are designated as strategic corridor streets for purposes of, for properties zoned light industrial or heavy industrial. And it starts off I-35, South 31st Street from H.K. Dodson Loop to the intersection with South 3rd Street, South 5th, Central, FM 2305, FM 1741, 93, State Highway 317, Outer Loop, Loop 363, State Highway 53, FM 2271, Canyon Creek Drive from South 5th Street to 31st, Marlinwood from South 5th Street to 31st, Lowe's Drive, and Raleigh Drive. I believe that was the list of those that were proposed to us originally before we changed it to citywide.
And
I think the ones in yellow
is
are the
one
ones
that
Yellow
you
is
added.
what was
That's
added.
correct. That's correct.
It's in 103.
So, back to my
So
amended
you're
motion.
for that to be considered for that alone,
Yes, sir.
and a sunset provision,
Yes, sir.
which is different from the review provision in what sense?
In that it actually comes back to council in a year for a revote on the ordinance. In other words, he can come to
This
us-
basically phases out in a year if we don't extend it.
Yes.
Correct.
Correct.
That's the major difference.
Yeah.
Okay. so that this ordinance is in place for 1 year from now, unless extended beyond that point.
And the reason the reason I say this is that we can see how it does. It's some gateways to the community, and we can see how it works, and then we get a feedback on it in a year. And if it's working well and it's not a problem, then we can expand it or not, instead of taking the whole step at one time.
Mayor, just as a point of clarification, I want to make sure I understand. I understand the part about he would amend the ordinance as recommended by P&Z, the sunset review instead of just a review by the council. And his other point of change is to apply the entire ordinance only to the original strategic corridors identified that are from the original ordinance or this second draft that aren't in yellow. Exactly. But you would apply the entire ordinance just to those corridors.
Yeah, the way that this ordinance reads here, apply that ordinance to those corridors that we first talked about. Is that clear?
If that's your motion, that's fine. Yeah. So, does the council understand that as presented? And is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Yes, we have a motion and a second.
Before the vote, I want to make two comments. One, I think it's important for people to understand why some folks have a problem with the strategic corridors. Basically, it's affording protection to certain areas and not affording it to the other areas, whether it be residential, huge areas of town, that if somebody makes an investment, builds a nice non-metal building, makes a significant investment, there's nothing protecting their property value. There's nothing protecting North Third. There's nothing protecting all the areas that people, whether you could have a metal building that just pops up right next door or right behind your house, like we have had in past years. And I think it's important that we don't just choose certain areas and say, we're going to protect this area. This area is worth protecting. But you know what? North Third's not. 25th Street's not. And those areas, so the reason it came about in the first place, I believe that all areas are afforded, or within reason, are afforded protection. Not just areas where the development, where people go in and want to build nice offices and banks and other things, and we'll protect them. But we won't protect the other areas. The second comment is I think it's, I'll vote, but I'm concerned. We had a P&Z group, a working group with all the stakeholders get together, put a tremendous amount of time in this thing. And they hammered out an agreement that was based on who you talked to, whoever compromised the most, but there was a consensus that the agreement, that they could live with this agreement, and it was a place to start. And I think it's a mistake to, when you have your P&Z and these stakeholders get together and hammer this out, to then go back and negate all the hours of the time that they put in on it and say, thanks for nothing, we're going to do it this way. With that being said, I'm ready to vote.
So we have the motion and a second, the amended motion and a second, and that's what we're voting on at this point. Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Jeter?
Absolutely not.
Councilmember Janczak?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Lennon?
Aye. What?
No,
I'm voting no. I'm sorry.
Councilmember Schneider?
Aye.
Mayor Jones?
No. So now we're back to the original motion, which was to accept the proposed ordinance as recommended by planning and zoning. And we have motion and second. Is there further discussion? Being none, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Jeter?
Aye.
Councilmember Janczak?
No.
Councilmember Lennon?
Aye.
Councilmember Schneider?
No.
Mayor Jones?
Aye. Next item is item 7A. It's first reading and a public hearing to consider adopting an ordinance authorizing an amendment to the West Temple Comprehensive Plan to reflect commercial uses on approximately 4.63 acres of land, commonly known as Outblock 561M, City Edition, located on the west side of North General Bruce Drive, north of Salisbury Park. And item 7B, which is a first reading and a public hearing to consider adopting an ordinance authorizing a zoning change from agricultural district to commercial district on approximately 4.63 acres of land, commonly known as Outblock 561M, City Edition, located on the west side of North General Bruce Drive, north of Salisbury Park. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This property in this case is part of the West Temple Plan, which was adopted in 1999. Here is a view of the future land use map for the West Temple Plan. The subject property is shaded in with hatches and is in yellow. This property that I'm outlining with the cursor at the moment, you very recently in March voted to do a land use map amendment and zone change for that property. And this case that's before you now is sort of to fill in the gap that is now there with the property in hatches on the screen. The request is for the commercial future land use category, which accommodates the commercial zoning district and the central area zoning district. A private road, approximately 20 feet wide, has served the property since about 1976. This road intersects with Interstate 35 and also with Frank Weiss Boulevard, which runs behind the Texas Roadhouse restaurant. Since the property has access to I-35 via the private road, it does comply with the thoroughfare plan. This map shows the water and sewer lines in the area. The property is served by a septic system right now, but a 15-inch sewer line does run through the property, as you can see on the map. And there's also water and sewer along the interstate, which through common ownership the property is connected to as well. The applicants are working with local engineering firm to connect with public water and sewer services that are a little closer by, and that will happen at a later date with platting of the property. And so I can say that public and private, adequate public and private facilities do serve the property. On April 7th, 2008, the Planning and Zoning Commission voted 8-0 for approval of the future land use map amendment that I've described from moderate density residential to commercial for the following reasons. The request complies with the future land use plan. It also complies with the thoroughfare plan, and adequate public and private facilities serve the site. And I neglected to say that a private water line currently is also serving the property. Now to the zoning portion of the case. The applicant is requesting commercial zoning district for an existing agricultural zoning designation. It is to accommodate the existing use that's currently on the property, which you can see a little piece of on the screen. The zoning ordinance calls this type of use contractor storage and equipment yard. Shallow Ford Construction is the business that occupies the property. This contractor storage and equipment yard use is permitted in the central area, commercial, and industrial districts. And as I mentioned, it would again fill in that gap that's sort of there between several commercially zoned properties. Here's an aerial of the property shown in red outline. The property was annexed in November of 1990 with the existing use already in place. As you know, all properties when they are annexed are zoned agricultural until they are later zoned in the future by the property owner. The granting of a zone change for this property would have the effect of matching the zoning with the long-standing use that's on the property. Again, this property just to the west, a few council meetings ago, was zoned to the same zoning district that is being requested tonight. A few pictures on the ground of the property. There's some fueling taking place on the property, as you can see. And again, maintenance of vehicles for the construction company would be taking place inside the bay doors. And also outdoor storage is going on in the property, and all those are allowed in commercial zoning. This is a zoning map of the area. You can see the commercial properties zoned in red. Even the residential uses over to the west have commercial zoning, and that is in Temple permitted for houses to be in commercially zoned areas. The agricultural zoning is a little bit to the northwest, and then there's light industrial all along the interstate. Again, this zoning request does comply with the West Temple Plan, with the thoroughfare plan, and public facilities, public and private facilities serve the property. The purpose of the commercial zoning district, according to our zoning ordinance, is to serve citywide or regional service areas. The zoning ordinance does say that it should be located at the intersection of major thoroughfares or highways, and should be located away from low and medium density residential development. There are many permitted uses in the zoning district. Most retail uses are permitted, and then several commercial uses such as servicing facilities, building material sales, and such as that. Restaurants and bars serving alcohol would require a conditional use permit in the commercial zoning district, just to inform you of that. Prohibited uses are shown on the screen, and they include apartments, sexually oriented businesses, shooting ranges, and things like wreckers and salvage yards. There are no lot area width or depth requirements for the commercial zoning district, and no front side or rear yard requirements unless that property fronts on residentially zoned property, and it doesn't, or not fronts on, but is adjacent to residentially zoned property, and it doesn't, so none of the yard requirements apply. Several notices were sent out to surrounding property owners on March 29th. The notice of the zone change was printed in the paper, and as of today, we've received no responses agreeing or disagreeing with the proposed zone change. For the zoning part of the case, the Planning and Zoning Commission voted 8-0 for approval of the zone change on April 7th. Because the zone change complies with the future land use map, it complies with the thoroughfare plan, and the public facilities and private facilities are in place on the site. At this point, I can answer any questions that the council might have on this case. And I would just throw in no issues were raised at P&Z for either case that required any further research from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Mabry. What they're doing right now is basically non-conforming.
It would be a non-conforming use, yes, because it's zoned agricultural, because it was annexed in 1990, and that use was already in place there when it was annexed.
So, hypothetically, if this is not passed, it doesn't prohibit them from continuing to do what it is that they're doing there today.
Correct, because they were in place and doing that use at the time of annexation.
Okay.
If the use were discontinued, hypothetically, the same use would not be able to start up again. So that would be one of the reasons for, other than having the zoning match the use, one of the reasons for for them requesting the zone change for the property.
And the use that is legally non-conforming like that can't be expanded, or if it's destroyed by more than 60%, it can't be rebuilt. There's some reasons why they would want to have the correct zone.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. Any other questions? If council has no objections, take public hearings simultaneously for A and B, A being the amendment to the comprehensive plan for West Temple, and B being the zoning change case. So if there's no objection from the council, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Mr. Dale.
Thank you. Rodney Dale, President of Charter Group, 3000 South 31st Street. I first want to deviate just for a second and say I'm pleased we're having another cleanup day, April 26th, and if you don't have all your locations secure, please call me and I'll be happy to help you find some more locations. So I like to do some permanent locations personally for our community. I think that would be a great addition. One correction I'd like to make, I think that Brian might have got confused with this particular tract as opposed to the former BFW tract, which is to the adjacent west. Brian made the statement that the property was in the process of potentially being platted and/or looking for water and sewer long-term, and this particular tract does have water and sewer already at it and is fine. The tract to the to the west that is currently under contract to be purchased is in the process of engineering water and sewer line to it from the city property just to the immediate south of the property. So that's been resolved. And so, but this particular tract is not in the plating process and is not in the process of having utilities extended to it because there are already utilities at that property. The only reason that this property has come before you is, as Jonathan mentioned, that if there was a fire at the property or some other destruction, or if he wanted to sell this piece of property under the same type of use, he would be prevented from doing so with a new owner. And so it only makes sense to be in conforming with your property that you're using. And the only reason we learned about this was because of the Skanska sale of their piece of property. You'll notice there's a small little square, Brian, you might get to that little square there, is also zoned agriculture and will need to be rezoned, but we didn't have the meets and bounds of that piece of property. So according to our policy, we have to have the meets and bounds to rezone a piece of property. So you'll be seeing me one more time to clean up this little area. And so with that, I don't have anything more to add to it.
Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate it. Any questions for Mr. Dale? Anyone else wish to speak before the council on this item? On either A or B? Seeing no one wishing to speak, I'll declare the public hearing closed. Council, your pleasure. We may take item A and B together or separately as you wish.
Motion to approve item 7A and B.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for approval of the amendment to the West Temple Comprehensive Plan for the parcels described, as well as a zoning change for the same parcel. There's no further discussion, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Jeter?
Aye.
Councilmember Jansen?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Williams?
Aye.
Councilmember Schneider?
Aye.
Mayor Jones?
Aye. Item 8, board appointments. Consider adopting a resolution appointing members to the following city boards. For Community Service Advisory Board, one member to fill an unexpired term through September 1st of 2009. We have a recommendation to appoint Nancy Etzel to that position. And item 8B is Temple Public Safety Advisory Board, one member to fill an unexpired term through September 1st of 2009. And it's recommended to appoint Matthew Wilder to that position. Council, your pleasure, together or separately as you wish.
Take them together, motion to approve them both.
Second it.
Have a motion and a second for approval of the appointment of Nancy Etzel to the Community Service Advisory Board and Matthew Wilder to Temple Public Safety Advisory Board. If there's no further discussion, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Jeter?
Aye.
Councilmember Jansen?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Williams?
Aye.
Councilmember Schneider?
Aye.
Mayor Jones?
Aye. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our agenda for this evening. Thank you for your attention and your participation in this evening's meeting. We are adjourned.